All right, our next topic here. There has been some information come out. According to VG Insight's Global Indie Games Market Report, indie games have generated nearly 4 billion in gross revenue on Steam from January 1st to September of 2024. Now, for comparison status, that's not necessarily it's obviously not as big as the AA AAA games, but it's not far off. Let me just look at this specifically what this article says. So, from VG Insights, the global indie games market has hit new heights in 2024. Our Global Indie Games Market Report 2024 offers an in-depth analysis of the indie game landscape. So highlights of the report: indie games now rival AAA titles on Steam. For the first time ever, indie games are generating as much revenue as AAA and AA titles on Steam. So I was actually wrong on that. Top indie game releases of 2024: Black Myth Wukong and Pal World have set new records with tens of millions of units sold. And yeah, those are indie games. Hard to think of it that way, especially Black Myth Wukong, considering how great that game looks. But I mean, it is a very small studio that made it from China. Growth of the indie market. Indie games sector has grown every year since 2020, despite the wider industry slowdown. Segmenting the indie market splits into triple I indies, middle market, small teams, and hobbyists. Each segment has seen unique trends in the last 4 years. Indie studios are maturing. More studios are releasing their second or third games, with experienced developers seeing better financial success with each release. So that's a basic summary of what the report says. What are your thoughts?
So I think my initial response is that this is great. It's good that we're seeing indie developers, smaller teams generating or making such well-renowned and also profitable games. And I mean, the fact that also is with thinking about this is the fact that the article said that they're generating roughly the same amount of revenue as AA and AAA games. That means while their revenue is the same, their profits are much higher because of the fact that they don't have all these different things, all these other employees they have to pay. They don't have all these other sort of like marketing materials they have to pay, all this other stuff. It's primarily just going directly to them. So like that's great for them that they're able to, continue to thrive, either improving the games that they're working on if they're still, doing stuff like adding, say, DLC, or if they went to work on a sequel game, or even just making a whole new experience altogether, that's great for them. Also, I think it's a testament to how, really, I think also the landscape of the gaming industry, because of the fact that a lot of games, primarily with the AAA games, are just bloated as far as like their costs. So that means they're either putting out games that are just like really expensive, like with a $70 price tags. People don't necessarily want to spend that much money on them, or the fact that the games might take longer to make, and so there are fewer AAA games coming out. But then also the fact that maybe some AAA companies might not be putting out games that people might not want to play because for one reason or another. But also the fact that one thing is the fact that with a lot of AAA games, they're pretty standard. They're cut and dry. They don't take chances. Whereas with indie games, smaller games, they are able to experiment. They give out unique experiences that you might not typically get, or you won't even get with a larger AAA experience. So that is another reason why these games, why this market is gaining momentum. And I think that there was a bit of a I don't want to say it was a stigma, but there was a bit of a stigma, I would say, probably in the mid 2010s, about indie games just being cheap NES clones, just shovelware type of stuff. Like it's like, oh, it's just pixel art games. That's all it is. That's all that indie games are. And it's like you have these these indie games like Black Myth Wukong, which looks like a AAA game, as you mentioned, and that's an indie game right there. And I mean, I remember there was some debate on whether or not technically CD Projekt Red was indie or not, and I'm like, if you want to say they're indie, then it's like you've got Witcher games, which are technically, if you count them as indie, then the Witcher trilogy is an indie game, or indie games. So I think it's definitely people are starting to not look down upon independent games, because I think people are starting to realize that the budget of a game does not necessarily correlate with the quality of a game. I mean, sure, you can spend, of course, you can spend, like, say, maybe $5-10 on a game and it's not going to be all that great, but you probably could spend $10-15 on a game and it's phenomenal. I mean, what, Messenger is $10 and you said it's a great game. I mean, let me just pull this up here. So, just to make sure that I have this correct here, this information here. So, one of my favorite games of all time is a small indie game. It's called Stardew Valley. It's $20, and as far as on Steam here, let's see how many hours. Let's see what it says here. Yeah, it is my most played game on Steam with about 359 hours. So I would definitely say that the game has given me my money's worth and then some. But just still, I think just in general, the fact that gamers are also willing to try new things, because they look at these experiences and say, this is something that I haven't seen before. Normally if I'm seeing a game, it's a simple first person shooter, or it's an action adventure game. Hey, here is a platformer game. It's a platformer game, but it's doing something that is unique enough. It's doing something that's different, something that I don't normally see every day. And it seems really intriguing enough that I want to actually go out and try it. Or for games that, maybe they are trying to replicate games from older eras, like the PS1, N64, or maybe even like the PS2 type style of games. They're trying to replicate those types of games that we used to enjoy when we were growing up and just like create a new experience. So I think that people really are willing to open up to these types of experiences, even if they aren't as clean and shiny as the big AAA stuff, and realize that, hey, we've got a really good time here. These aren't games that, are going to be, say, we've got 50-hour story mode right here, but it's just going to be something that's a very fun experience and something that we can just enjoy. So I think that that's why these games are definitely being a whole lot popular. But I do think this is a great thing, and I'm very happy to see that this is a thing.
I agree. So to kind of add on a bit to what you've said, there's this constant debate of PC versus console, and I'm not here to like shame people for playing on console or whatever. Like, I totally understand. I mean, consoles are simple, and it's more or less plug and play. I mean, it's not 100%, not nearly as much as it used to be, but more or less, you put a game in. You might have to download some updates, but typically you don't have to do a whole lot to get the game running. But the thing about console that I find is the case too often, and not 100% of the time, I know plenty of people that this is not the case. too often what console gamers are looking for is they want something that shows off the power of their hardware. They want a game that makes it feel like their hardware was worth the money that they spent on it. And I say that not just as someone from the outside looking at it, I say that as someone who had that attitude myself when I was playing, like when it came to the Switch, when it came to PS4, PS3, so on and so forth. So many of these systems, I wanted to have a game that really pushed the hardware. Something that made it feel like, okay, this was worth the investment more. And I think it was also just because of the fact that early on, especially, I was very much interested in seeing something that felt new and different in terms of how it looked and how it felt and that sort of thing. And so, like, I gravitated, especially like in the N64 games, towards 3D games. And I still have a deep love for like 3D platformers and things like that, where it's kind of something special that's hard to explain. But at the same time, I've also grown to really love 2D games that much more, like far more than I did when I was younger. Like, I mean, I liked them fine, of course, obviously back in the Super Nintendo days, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, because that was all we had. But as I've grown older, getting past N64, PS2, and so on and so forth, as much as I still love those games, I've also grown a deep appreciation for 2D indie titles, because I find so often so many of these games are just better made. They may not look as pretty or whatever, but they run well, they're optimized. A lot of times they're very creative. They'll do things that you don't see in the AAA sphere. And getting back to how this relates to console versus PC, one of the things that I found, some of which is certainly just a personality thing as well, and isn't necessarily just PC versus console, but one of the things that I find so freeing about being on PC is that I don't feel that pressure to be like, oh, I need something that pushes my hardware. I just feel like I play the games I want to play. It doesn't matter how much it pushes my hardware. Yes, of course, I always love it when I find a game that pushes my hardware, that looks fantastic, and that plays great. I mean, like, great example of that. Jedi Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor. Those games look and play great. They're Metroidvanias. They're 3D. They're the good parts of Star Wars, for the most part. It's like, they have lots of great things about them. And they still look great, run great, push the hardware. It's just like they check all those boxes, but they're still... I love being able to be like, okay, well, that game is like heavily inspired by PS1 graphics. Like, what's the game? No Sun to Worship, which is like that game that's heavily inspired by Metal Gear Solid. Looks kind of like a PS1 game, albeit with, better lighting and so on and so forth. But it's like, that just like got me excited when I saw that. Especially because of the fact that I became a Metal Gear fan and all that. But I find so often with these indie titles, they're willing to take more risks, like you said. They're willing to try different things, to be love letters to older games without necessarily having to be Unreal Engine 5 and look like top of the line in terms of graphics and have completely bloated budgets. And as a result, they can make a great game, spend a lot less money on it, and as a result, if the game does well, they make a lot more profit, which helps them so that they can make more games. And they can do so without it having to be another ridiculously high budget game. So that's why you have so many like of these big AAA types of games that they end up getting shut down because they do so poorly. I mean, like, you do have the example of Black Myth Wukong, which, largely because it's based on Chinese mythology, did amazingly well because it sold a ton in China, and China is one of, if not the biggest country in terms of population in the world. And, of course, this is one thing where the Communist Party of China did not prevent them from buying this game, probably because it's based in Chinese history. With all the other limits they have. But anyway, all that being said, I'm really happy that indie games are doing well on Steam. I want to keep supporting them. I bought probably more indie games in the past year than I bought of non-indie games. And I mean, granted, I probably technically spent more on non-indie games because of the fact that I bought more at launch, like several of the PlayStation titles. But I've had in general just as much of a good time with the indie games as I have with the non-indie games, if not better.
Yeah, I want to quickly add something. And at first, I understood what you were saying, but it didn't resonate with me. But then I thought about it, and then I realized, yeah, that actually technically was also me. While I wasn't necessarily looking for games that pushed my hardware, granted, because I knew I was a Nintendo fanboy, and I was like, games that push my hardware aren't going to be running on my system anyway. But at the same time, I wasn't necessarily looking for anything that would count as being indie, because I was like, yeah, those games don't look really all that great though. Not even thinking about the fact that these games could be fun. So I think that's definitely something that possibly a lot of console gamers are overlooking, because of the fact that, they think that, as you said, it's not something that is really demanding. So why should we really be paying attention to it? Not overlooking the fact that, there actually is something here with substance. Now, I think that for a lot of these publishers that, release games physically, indie games physically, I think that sort of helps promote them on console, and there gets more interest in those types of games. So I think it definitely helps, like with limited run games, Strictly Limited, and I can't remember what the other one is, but with companies like those, it definitely helps to promote smaller games. And
Right.
So people, especially because I think at first you might say, people who are like a lot of collectors, they'll say, oh yeah, we're getting these games for collecting purposes, but through that word of mouth, people see these games and they see the gameplay and they're thinking like, hey, that actually looks kind of fun. I might look this up, see if this is on, my console, see if it's like on the game store. Oh wait, it's on the eShop? Yeah, I think I'll buy this. Oh, it's on the PlayStation shop? Yeah, why not? I think I'll give this a try. Oh, it's only for like $10. Yeah, why not? I'll give this a shot. It's not a lot of money. And so I think that those services definitely help with this aspect. So I think that, and also I would also say, is that Game Pass is another thing that can definitely help out here. And I've mentioned this before, but with a friend of mine with Game Pass, he started playing indie games through that, and he gained an appreciation of indie games as a result, which before that point, he never would have wanted to touch an indie game, because he thought, oh, it's just basic pixel art games. There's something really special about them. But then when he played the games, and I think the one in particular he played was Sea of Stars, and he was like, this game is amazing. And as a result, he's just like, man, a lot of indie games are so much better than the AAA games that are coming out. And I'm just like, yes. So yeah, I definitely believe that through all these different means outside of PC gaming, we're definitely starting to see more people, start to have an appreciation of what indie devs can do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, those games can be a gateway drug, essentially. I mean, like, except in a positive way. Just you get a taste of a really good indie game, and then you're like, this is great. I want to play more games like this, and then you find more games that are like that, and then you end up expanding from there, and you see another game that like might not be exactly the same, but is a little bit different. You're like, oh, that was fun. I want to try. I want to try this other one. I mean, it's like Hades, for example, is a great example
Yes.
because I was never interested in roguelikes, roguelites, nothing like that. Like to me, the idea of playing and then losing everything and having to start over again, I just no, I wanted no part of that. But when I heard about Hades, I mean, for one, I already knew Supergiant was a great developer because I'd played both Transistor and Bastion, and I loved them both. And so I was like, okay, I've heard Hades is great. I know that Supergiant makes quality games. I know that their music is great, especially their vocal pieces. I love their vocal pieces. So good. So good. Um, and then I, found out that, oh well, yes, it's a roguelite though, because you still maintain upgrades. It's just that there are certain upgrades that are temporary things that you get just during a run, and they're kind of randomized and that sort of thing, but you still get like permanent upgrades, like being able to increase the amount of, I don't remember what else stats you can increase through that. But the point is that there was enough to drive me to give it a chance, to where I ended up playing it and loving it. And the only thing I still have not played enough to get the epilogue, because that requires a lot of runs, a lot of grinding, and I just have like, I go back to it occasionally and play for a bit, and then I stop. And eventually I'll get to that point. But yeah, so stuff like that can really drive you there. I mean, Metroidvanias, like I didn't really know that I would like Metroidvanias until I played Super Metroid. And then once I played Super Metroid, I played like 3 other Metroid games in a row, and then after that I wanted to play other Metroidvanias, and since then it's like every time I hear the words Metroidvania, I'm like, my ears perk up, and I'm automatically interested, regardless of whether it's a 2D or a 3D. And yeah, it's just such good stuff. So, all right. Anything else on that topic?
No, sir.